Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today to start this Dataverse Summit 2022. And as Raz mentioned, and I already introduced myself, I'm Nico Fernandez. Quick comments on me so you get to know me if you don't know me already. So I've been working around with CRM for the last 13 years, the last 8 years around Dataverse or dynamic CRM. As you know, probably you'll know Dataverse is what we used to have in dynamic CRM, previous versions. Uh, but I've been working with other CRMs and no-code, low-code solutions for a little bit longer. 3 years ago, I became MVP, so I was awarded as an MVP in business applications, and I also started being an MCT. I just finished, well, I'm finishing my first book, so that's why I put the first time I put an outro here in a presentation. So hopefully in the next few months you will be able to see that. I will of course buzz on the social media on that. I like to speak in sessions, in person, online sessions. It's something I really enjoy. And as Ras mentioned, I have a few initiatives with a few colleagues that's called Power Freaks 5 initiatives. There is a group of different initiatives, mostly in Spanish for the moment. But for example, we are going to have two after parties, two Ignite after parties next week, one in Spanish, the other one in English. So I encourage you to contact me in LinkedIn and stay tuned for the invite. I'm currently a solution director in HCL Tech. That means I'm in charge of the pre-sales team, or I lead the pre-sales team in EMEA, and I also coordinate the APAC pre-sales team as well. So it's a really exciting moment for being in this industry for me. So quick review on the agenda today. Security, as Ras mentioned, is something critical. I think it's data modeling and security side of the design of the solution. It's critical always because that will let you know if you're doing things right or not, if you're going to have a scalable solution or you are doing things too complex or too ad hoc for exceptions. So in this session, I'm going to try to unwrap the security layers, and I will focus mostly on the strictly Dataverse side, even that we're going to mention a few Azure Active Directory plus Dataverse security concepts and considerations. There's going to be a deep dive session on that later today. And then we are going to mention something that, if you didn't saw that yet, it's going to be a really useful tool for citizen developers or citizen developer admins to manage and to have an overall view of what is happening on the security model in your environments. So the first thing I want to start here is which are key considerations you need to consider. Oh, sorry, let me rephrase that. Key considerations you need to keep in mind when you talk about and you start defining the security or strategy in your deployments. And I'm talking about security strategy, not security model only, because it's much more than that. So the first thing you need to consider, we need to start thinking when you talk about security considerations is the architecture. So we need to have a deep understanding on different components we are going to use, how they're limited, or how we need to work around them, or surround them, or with them on security aspects and considerations. Not everything works at the same way, and this is something we need to consider even more when the platform is evolving a lot. And actually, there's a lot of things right now in preview features in the security side of Dataverse. It's a really amazing moment for Dataverse. So the second thing is the security per se, and here it's everything surrounding the licensing considerations, how you're going to manage the environments, but also how you're going to access those environments. Things like Microsoft Intune or conditional access, that we're going to talk about that later today, or data loss policies as well. So those really core security components that we could say, yeah, this is security, right? How I will design my security model, how I will design my security strategy. The third thing is you need to be alerted and take action when something happens. So think which others you need to build to keep you on top of the key audit events, and how you can do that with maybe flows, or which policies you need to build with Power Apps or Automate or PowerShell. And the last thing, and that's not a minor thing, so as a security considerations, you need to monitor, you need to keep on what is happening in the environments in your tenant. So there's a few tools for you, and there's a few things you need to consider as an always on strategy, as an always on activity. That is not only about security roles, if I'm business units, teams, etc. So that part is going to be just the core part of the security. That's where we are going to deep dive today, or we're going to work in detail today. But there's other considerations you need to have when you talk, and even more in enterprise organizations and enterprise projects, you need to keep in mind when you discuss the security strategy with the customer. Sorry, customer could be your internal customer as well, right? So I don't want to say that we're all consultants. So first thing to understand on the security aspects is that Microsoft Dataverse, and that's something actually Mario Moedo and Marco Moedo, sorry, and Mario Trueba mentioning in Dataverse Security Hero session early this year. I like the example. So it's like an onion. So you have different layers, right? And each one of the layers will have a specific use, and you'll manage specific things on the security aspects. So the first layer, of course, the core of everything is Dataverse, and that's where we are going to manage the data access, the specific data access, and we're going to talk about the different aspects and considerations on the Dataverse security layer. Then you have on some components and applications and different objects, the app access and control sharing. So it's not only how you access the data in Dataverse, having the privileges for accessing the data, but it's also having the privileges and having access to the interface to access the data, right? So it's that level as well. Environment management, how you're going to separate the data, how you're going to manage different applications on environments, and also how you're going to enable connectors to work together are part of environments and DLP layer of the strategy. Sorry, guys, my daughter Shaz, she's she's having fever, and she just woke up. Give me 1 second. I'm really sorry. Sorry, guys. Really sorry for that. It's been a complex night with the fever. So next layer that we have is the licensing. Of course, this is the first control we're going to have, the first gate we're going to need to pass in order to access different components and services in the Power Platform. And the last point that we have here in the layers is the Active Directory. And here's where we're going to have the authentication and control access. And here's where the conditional access we mentioned before is going to take place. It's going to happen. So double click on the Dataverse security concept. There's a few main concepts happening in Dataverse that we need to consider when we design the security model. And it's not only about role security, role-based security, right? So it's not only about security roles. There is a major part, of course. Without a security role, we won't be able to access Dataverse data, but it's not the only point. But let's start with it. So role-based security basically will give you the possibility to create or to use out-of-the-box native security roles. Those security roles will have a granularity access definition separated in privileges and access level. Okay, and this is going to be for each one of the tables in the application, but also for specific functionality like export to Excel. There's not a specific table, but it's a cross functionality. This is something that you'll have as by default. many roles. If you're working with Dynamics 365, there are customer engagement, there are first-party applications built on top of Dataverse, then you're going to have a lot of security roles. You need to be really careful how you work with them, because basically when you add different security roles to a user, the final privileges that the user will have is the addition of all the different roles. So if I have a role that doesn't give me any privilege to access accounts, for example, then I am assigned to another role on top of that that has full organization privileges. I will have that level of access because it's the addition of every role. And that takes us to the different 5 levels of access that we can have, and that's none. So I don't have any type of privileges, and the privileges could be read, write, create, delete, append to, share, assign. So for each one of the privileges, you will have one of the 5 levels. That's be none, my own, the business unit, parent-child business unit, and organization. And we're going to understand this better when we continue working with the different concepts. But basically, none is pretty obvious, and own as well. And then we have organization, means everything. The business units are the next point in the security concepts. Basically, they work with the security roles and allows you to say, okay, I'm seated on this unit, and because of this, and because of the role that I have assigned, then maybe I can see whatever is happening on these specific units. And then the business unit have a hierarchical configuration, so you can define that hierarchy. And if I'm part of the parent business unit, and my level of access is part of child business unit, I will be able to, for example, see whatever is happening in my business unit and whatever is happening in the child business unit. So any other business unit that is connected to that one. Basically, when we work with business units and security roles, we build this structure that will define, depending where I am, what I'm going to do, what I'm going to see, which privileges I'm going to have, or on top of which records or with which records I will be able to work. There is a new aspect on business units that is modernized business units. Basically, allows us to it's a more flexible way to manage when you are assigned to a specific business unit, but then you need to access data of another business unit that could be in the same level or could be in a completely different branch on the organization. Previously, what we need to do, we need to create a team, assign the person to the team, and it was more complex to manage. Now, you basically, what you can do is you can assign a security role from another business unit to a person that is not in that business unit. So it provides more flexibility, and it's more easy to manage because you need to create that many teams in order to share the data. So the last point, or one of the last points that we need to understand is that we can also associate business units with an Azure Active Directory security group. That's something we are going to discuss later, and probably it's going to be covered in the session later today. And last point, but not less important. So when you have this structure, you start defining your model where you have, this is owned by a person in this business unit. It's not the only thing you can do. So the records has also another field that is called owning business unit. So you can define to which business unit that record belongs, and that's something that natively is going to be for the record for the person that is creating the record, of course. But that's something also you need to consider. You can work and you can play with that. Only this part of the security model that is critical, and of course you need to set your security based on the roles and the business units, can be really complex. So, and you can have different strategies. So from this role side, you can create a specific role for specific business persona. So you can build the role for I don't know, the sales manager. And that will be a role that you will assign to a sales manager. But you could also have a different approach, enabling different privileges on different layers of the security. So you could have a base security role, enable everyone to the core components of the solution. For example, I don't know, contacts and my own activities, etc. Right? So everybody will have a subset of privileges, regardless of the position and the role in the organization. Then you can audition different privileges and access level by adding all the different roles. And that is, again, a completely different strategy where you will manage, instead of only one security role per person, you will have multiple layers, and you need to be really careful on how you manage that. Uh, I don't think there is a one specific perfect way, because the requirements on the business are completely different when you see different projects. And you need to identify, of course, you will have a preference on your strategy, but you need to identify all the requirements before you start building your security model. So another concept that we have is the hierarchical security. Basically, it allows us to do a roll-up security. So if I am defined as somebody else manager, I will be able to access to the data, and actually to the first level, I will be able to read and write, right? But for any other further level, so the people that person is a manager, I only will be able to read those records. Uh, then you have the position hierarchy instead of the manager hierarchy. So instead of being uh, I am the manager, I am maybe the, as I say, the pre-sales lead. So my position is on top of the pre-sales architect, and the pre-sales architect is on top of the pre-sales consultant. So that hierarchy on the position side will have the same behavior. And you can choose one or the other when you're working with hierarchical security in your Dataverse implementation. Another concept that is important is sharing. So basically, if you have the access level, if you have the privilege of sharing, you can share a specific record to individuals, and that's something, again, easy to do, but you need to be really careful, because this can escalate a lot. How this is managed in the background is, if you start sharing and you base your security model on sharing, the performance of your application will be really bad. So it's something also to consider. You shouldn't be approaching to, okay, I will start sharing records, and that's going to be my approach to grant access. You can do that, but you will have a performance issue sooner than later. Last few concepts to review: the column level security. Basically, when we talk about the role security, or security roles, sorry, the role-based security or security roles, what you're defining is, okay, for the account, I will have access only for my account. Okay, that is for the entire record or row on the terminology. But one record or one row have multiple columns, and maybe one specific field is critical, or maybe it's I don't know, if it's an non-profit organization and you have people that make donations and they are, I don't know, celebrities. You don't want everybody to access the private email or the private mobile phone. So you could define a column level security for those columns. So only a group of people will be able to read, create, or update those fields, those columns. And it basically is by creating profiles, and you assign those profiles both to users or teams, and those people is going to have that specific privilege on that specific column. Oh, those columns, right? Because profile could more than one. Last thing is the teams, and this is something that comes from a long time ago. Um, the owner teams are quite easy to understand, so it's basically they are structured, they're static teams where you say, okay, these 5 people is my pre-sales team, right? And I will create the pre-sales team so I can easily manage security for everybody. I can assign a role to the owner team. I can define different teams to, a person being part of different teams, so that will as I mentioned before, that will give them access to different records. And that's a classic way. That's the first way to manage teams. Several years ago, Microsoft introduced also the access teams. The access teams are basically dynamic record-based teams. So for a specific record, not for all the opportunities, but for this specific opportunity, I'm going to create this ad hoc team of these two people that are the sales team working or supporting on this opportunity. And that will give them the privileges defined as the access team template. So you will define that as an access team template. Whenever you assign or you include that person in the access team, then that security will be applied to them. The last type of team are the group teams, and that's related to the Azure security group that I mentioned before, where you can or we'll see that we can map it to different security rules. So considerations on the table record of ownership that I just mentioned. So this is how a security role configuration looks like. Basically, you'll have all the entities or tables on the first column, and then the different columns are going to be the privileges that you can provide to each one of the tables, or you can compute to each one of the tables. And the little circles are the access levels. So you have 5 access levels, as mentioned before: non-user business unit, parent-child business unit, and the organization. So basically, for each one of these circles will tell you what you can do for an account. So for the account, for example, I can create for the organization, read everything the organization writes, so update anything the organization, delete anything, etc., etc. And in general, you will have these possible 5 levels, but it will depend on the data modeling that you did. So I'm not going to go deep on this one, but basically you have 3 type of tables, but we are going to talk about 2. You have the standard tables, and then you have you have the own by user team tables, and you have the organizational tables. So the ones that are owned by user team, it means that the record can be assigned to a specific person or to a specific team. And on those tables, you will be able to define these 3 levels of privileges, okay? Because if a person cannot be the owner, it doesn't make any sense to have a user level, right? So because I will never be the owner of that record. Then the organization tables, they're going to be, binary. I do have access or I don't have access, and it's everything or nothing, right? Full Monty. So basically, those tables are, I don't know, for example, things like master data tables that everybody needs to access. I can think on countries. If you want to create a country table, everybody should access the country table, and then you can apply. You can say, okay, everybody will access, nobody will access. So this person will access to everything, or this person won't access to anything, right? So that's binary level on the organization tables. Then, as I mentioned before, you can associate the business unit with an Azure Active Directory security group. This will help us to give me, sorry, 1 second. Sorry, guys, I'm really sorry for this. Basically, when you create an Azure Active Directory security group, you then can so you can create that, and you can create the link to the specific team, and then assign the role to the specific team. So whenever you include a user to a specific Azure Active Directory security group, you will be streaming that directly to Dataverse, and you will be granting the security role automatically. So this is a really good thing to work and to do things faster. One important thing, because we mentioned a lot of concepts on the security side, it's after all this, how the platform will know if I have access to a record or not, right? So the first thing that the platform will check, the application will check if is the privileges, right? So do I have access to the table? That's the first thing. If I don't have access to the table, that skips, and that's all, right? That's why it's important to keep as simple as possible how you manage the security roles, because if you have 50 security roles assigned to you, then the privilege check needs to run, and calculate everything. So it's going to take more time than if you just have one security role assigned to you. I'm not saying that you should only have one. I'm saying that, of course, if you have a lot of security roles, that adds complexity to the model. Once you have access to the table, that's the privilege check, then it's the access check, right? Which type of access do you have? Are you the owner of the record, or who is the owner of the record, and where you are seated on the business unit, which level of access do you have, and who's the owner? So that part, and that's based on the role access. Then is somebody share with you this record. So this record is shared with you, and this could be because it's directly shared, or this could be because it was through an access team, because the access team underneath what it's doing is helping you to manage easily and better the how you share these records. And then the hierarchy access. So I am the manager of somebody, or my position is on top of somebody else that owns and have access to this record. So that is how the platform will consider and do the validation to define who has access to each record when you actually, if you have access to a specific record when you try to access it. So a few but important considerations from an environment perspective. The first of all is conditional access. This is something I already mentioned before, and if you work with Azure Directory already, you probably know about it. But basically, allows you to define how, when, and where a person is going to be able to access the applications. So you can say, I want the user to be in this country, or I want the user to be in the office, or I want the user to be using this device to access this application. So allows you to define different level of rules, and if they will grant access directly, if one it will block access or maybe require multi-factor authentication. That's everything something you need to do, or you can do with the conditional access. And again, this is not a part of the Dataverse per se, but it affects how you access Dataverse in real life. The second thing, and this is quite interesting, because it's like, okay, I need to grant access to external people. Can I do that? And as a classic answer, it was like, yeah, you need a portal. And yeah, the portal licensing is not the best. But actually, what you can do, you can invite users to your environment using their own login credentials. And once the license security roles are assigned to them, then they will be able to access the applications. So this is called Azure Active Directory B2B collaboration. Most likely is going to be covered in the session later today. But again, it's something important for you to start considering, because if you have vendors or partners or the type of user that need to access your applications, and of course, you need to consider that part of the licensing model. What is an external user? What is an internal user from a licensing perspective, not from a real life perspective, but licensing. So from a licensing perspective, an external user is someone that is not acting in your behalf. So if it's a vendor or a partner acting in your behalf, they are not going to be external users from a licensing perspective. So they need to have a license assigned to them. That's where this type of component or feature makes sense to have in consideration your security strategy. Then we have the data loss policies, and this basically allows you to define policies at a tenant level and at an environment level. And of course, whatever happens at a tenant level has a priority, or it's more important that whatever you define at an environment level, and allows you to define basically how the different connectors are going to work together. And this will create groups of connectors. So the easy way is to say, okay, I have only one data loss policy, and that's fine. So I will create my business, non-business, and blog connectors. And based on that, I'm going to be able to create, for example, flows that interact between each other, right? So anything that is on the business can work together. Anything that is in the non-business can work together. And if I have something blocked, I cannot use it, right? The best example, the more used example here is, okay, Twitter. I don't want my data in Dynamics to be exposed on Twitter, so I'm going to block Twitter, right? Now, it's not now, it's been around for a bit already. We can also start doing granular control. So it's not only I'm going to block and say that Twitter is non-business. Maybe I'm not going to block it. I'm going to say it's non-business. So I can let Twitter to work with other non-business related connectors. Um, but I also can define, okay, actually on Twitter, I'm going to block post action, and I'm going to allow, to get the tweet. So this is really nice. This enables you, again, it's not specifically how to do things in Dataverse, but it's related on how you do things with the data and what are you going to allow users to do and build applications and automations with data surrounding the data that you have in Dataverse. Okay? Another thing to consider is how you enable different tenants to connect. This is one of the things that are in preview, but this been around for a while already. Basically, you can enable to have a one-way direction, one-way access. So you have the customer tenant Contoso, the external tenant Fabricam. You could enable Contoso user to establish a connection using Fabricam credentials, but you won't enable the incoming connection, right? So a Fabricam user to connect using Contoso credentials. Or you can block both, right? So you don't want any cross-tenant access. So you can block that. Or you can go free on the live and say, yeah, I have no issue with this. I will allow this cross-tenant access. So this is, again, something in addition to the classic security world or the classic security considerations. But as I say before, Microsoft is advancing a lot on this aspect, and we need to keep an eye on what is coming in the next few releases as a GA. Because right now there's a few other things on preview that, of course, you shouldn't use in a production environment. So the last point onto this presentation, I try to talk fast today because of time, but I think I record the time quite well. So the last thing I want to introduce today is the Dataverse Security app. The Dataverse Security app is an app built by the PowerCat team. This is a team from Microsoft, and basically allows you to have a more 360 view of your security in the environment. It allows you to go select the security role, see which teams or users have it, or actually you can also drill down and go to a specific person profile and see what security components are being configured or are part of the that user. So it's a really easy way, something that the product doesn't provide. And yeah, I will have to be honest. When I saw this the first time, I was like, this is really great, and this is a really good example on how you can extend Dynamics 365 Dataverse Support Platform with Power Platform itself, right? But at the same time, it's like it will be really nice if Microsoft just put this as part of the out of the box solution, because I think it's really useful component to start uh, having that deep view of what is happening. So if you assign a role by mistake, you can go through this and you can see that. If you are not sure what a user is able to do, you can come here and see that more easily. Yeah, thank you, Show, for sharing that link. Um, so it's a really good application. I recommend this to any implementation. So it's a free application to deploy. It's effortless, and it's adding value to your customers, providing this administration tool to them. So last thing, and I'll open microphone to anything I see. Okay, I see the question. I'll take a look at that in a moment. Um, so, few key design considerations, and this is not at all a Bible. This is not at all, the truth that you need to follow. These are a few insights that I have. There's a really good white paper that is being evolving from ASHIS. I don't recall right now when was the last time it was actually updated, but it's a really good white paper on security, on dynamics. But of course, it applies to Dataverse because, as I mentioned before, and probably we all know, Dataverse came from the CRM. I recommend you to go deep in that white paper. I will paste the link in the chat when you finish. So, do your data model to be security model to do simple checks. As we saw before, when the system needs to check if you have access to a record, it will go first to the privileges, and then it will go to the access, and it will have different considerations. The ideal scenario, it will be, okay, you own the record, right? So it's just security rules. That's the easiest way to work with that. You own the record. That's great. If you need to start adding a lot, and this is when I'm talking about a lot, I'm talking about probably thousands of security roles or teams, stuff like that. That will add complexity, and that will make the checks to take longer, right? So that could affect your system performance. Second, and it's related, is the number of roles and teams. As I mentioned, when we talk about this, we're talking about thousands, not talking about 100 or 50 or 60 roles, right? And it's all about having also a really good strategy on why you're creating a role, what's the use of that. Try to keep things simple. I think that's always the best approach. Don't rely in sharing, right? I already mentioned that you shouldn't be putting your security strategy on the share privilege, right? So it's great, you can do that, but if you do all sharing, that's not going to be really scalable. When you start working with Dynamics or with Dataverse, the first mistake we all do probably is, okay, I need a new security role. Okay, I will go security roles, create, and you start creating a role. And then when you try to test it, it's like, oh, I don't have access to the organization. I don't have access to this, to that. It's a pain in the back, I would say. So the easiest way to ensure that you will have access and the security role will cover everything is not only having access to this specific table, copy an out-of-the-box role and customize it. And here's where probably having a base security role makes sense, right? So because you can guarantee everybody will access the core functionality with a base security role, and then on top of that, you can create directly, a new role, because you will add it won't be affecting the access to the platform itself or to Dataverse itself. It will be affecting just the access to the tables that you want to provide, and also you something I didn't mention and probably I should, so I will put it now as a side comment. You can share specific object to specific security roles, and that is not a security aspect, but it's something you need to also consider, because when you're defining your security strategy and your application strategy, you don't need to create multiple apps. You can have the same application accessed by different users with different security roles, and each one of those could have a different experience. Because, for example, the form they will see, the salesperson can see the sales account role, and the customer service person will see the customer service account role. Two completely different roles designed to the specific use cases they have on the same application. So that's also to consider when, again, it's not a security aspect per se, but it's related. When you define and you draw your you design how it's going to be the business unit, the organizational structure in Dataverse, you don't need to follow whatever the company is in real life, right? So if the company is divided by different organizations or business units in real life, and each one of those have the legal department, the marketing department, and the sales department, to say a simple example, you don't have to do that. So you can do whatever you need to make your security model simpler. Okay, so we are not trying to replicate the organization in Dataverse. We're trying to build the best security model, and that's something, again, it's really common to fall in that mistake. So keep in mind that don't build for exceptions. I think this is something we all know, and it's not only about security. There's a lot of ways to share and to ensure that what I mentioned before, you have a private data, you can manage that quickly with column level security. You don't need to do anything crazy. So don't work thinking, okay, I have this exception on this happens once every 10,000 times. Oh, how I'm going to create a really complex security model to ensure. No, don't do that. Keep it simple. And again, the Dataverse is amazing. Security model in Dataverse is amazing, but it can be really complex and manageable. The last point, be smart when you define the data model. And this might not be that obvious, I think. So when you're working on your data model, you may have, I don't know, your contact, right? And your contact will have the contact details. It will have, I don't know, the health information, different type of information on the contact level, right? So information from the contact. But some of these data may be quite private, and you may need to define specific security on that data. Even that, naturally, you will say, okay, this is part of my contact table. Even that is your instinct. You don't have to do that. Okay, so you need to understand how the security and the data model work together. So maybe what you need to do is you need to define another table that is related. In that table, you can have a lot of the private information or the more secure information, or information that you need to manage differently that the core contact, and I'm using contact as an example, right? The core contact data and information. So be smart on that. You don't have to, have all the information in one table. You can play around with that and leverage on the security privileges and access level. So, hope I wasn't that fast. I want to give a few minutes at the end. If there was any question, again, I can read on the monitor. There's something I will read it out slowly. If you have any question, please paste it on the chat. I'll review it now. My contact information is here, and of course, after this, there is a really great tips and tricks session with Ruben. So I encourage you to stay tuned to attend to that.
Thank you very much, Nico. So thank you, Nico, for that great introduction to security for Dataverse. And a reminder to everyone, we will be doing more of a deeper dive into Dataverse security after 1 hour. So just as a reminder for everyone there. But great introduction and a great comments coming from the chat here. So the first one is from Coquelin, who's saying, with the Matrix business unit introduction, a user is a business unit can own a record in business unit B. Yeah. When the record is assigned, so when a user in business unit A can own a record in business unit B. When the record is assigned to business unit B in the matrix model, will the record move to the new unit? If the record stays in the same unit, the owning business unit column value becomes sort of not relevant anymore. What's your view on that? So this is a common question when it comes to ownership of records with the Matrix business units. And then what yeah, so that's the first question. Does that make sense to you, Nico? So he's asking a question in reference to the Matrix business units.
The modern business
Yeah,
unit. Yeah.
yeah.
I will be honest here. I didn't have time to test it a lot, so I'm not really sure on how it's the behavior that you're asking. But that's something I can check, and you can ping me on LinkedIn, and we can talk about it later. I will take a look.
Yeah, keep that question, Coquelin, because we're going to address it again in after 1 hour. We'll be doing more for deep dive, so definitely keep that question. Next question from Kosh is this is what I'm waiting for a couple of years and creating my own app. So that's that app, your security app we revealed. So thanks for sharing that, Nico. So Jason was also saying this looks great. He's been looking to build something similar in custom pages, and Joe Scully shared that link there. So Joe Scully is saying this is great. Nicholas is doing all the hard work. I am getting the most likes. Yeah. So
but share the link. That's the important part.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that, Joe. Jason is saying, in reference to not relying on sharing, if a user has read-only access to accounts across multiple business units, how would you recommend giving modify access to accounts of a certain type across the same business unit?
A certain type of account.
All right. So this is where an account is basically, of type. Rather, but I think, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Nico.
That's not supported with the security roles. Then you need to rely on something like sharing. Yeah, maybe you can have also something that these type of accounts are all in this business unit, and then I will have more access, more access level for that business unit. That's something else you can do, but I don't know the details on the requirements. So you could do the sharing, or you can have a more complex business unit strategy.
Now, just let's dwell on this for a bit, Nico, Jason, because I think this is a common scenario, and what Nico just said, basically, let's delve into that answer. So what Nico just said, Jason, is that your account types can also be owned by different business units. Just dwell on that for a second. Right? So your account types can be owned by different business units. That's what you would essentially do to apply a security model based on those account types. So therefore, each of those account types would be owned by a different business unit that has a hierarchy. And that way you can assign security privileges to each one of those based on the hierarchies. That's essentially what Nico just said. Nico, would you agree?
Yeah, completely.
And this is the way that we do it, guys. This is essentially the important concept that we're trying to convey here, is that the ownership of your records fundamentally defines your security model. So in certain circumstances where you can't overcome that, then yes, you sharing. That's the way to overcome those constraints. But we at this point in time, Jason, you haven't reached that constraint. You can actually just use the standard feature, which is basically based on the type of account, assign a specific business unit, and based on that, you would then get a security. You would automatically get a hierarchy structure for that particular account structure that you've got there. For those types of accounts, for example, and you've also got hierarchies as well. But I guess that's for a different scenario. But yes, so just reading through the comments there, Bainan saying thank you very much. Ashley, thank you, that was useful. Joe Scully, thank you. Deepak, Andrew Gibson, Coquelin. Right, okay. So Mayank, hi there, Coquelin. Yeah, Mayank is saying, what are your views in hierarchy? Okay, well, that transitions nicely. So now Mayank is asking, what are your views in hierarchy security model for Dataverse?
Yeah, I think it's a nice feature. When it was introduced several years ago, I think it had more flexibility, but it always has its limitations. to recall one implementation from a long time ago, you cannot define the behavior, right? So if I am the manager, your manager, and that's the type of security, hierarchy security that you will define, I will read and write on your records. You cannot change that level of access or those privileges. And if you need only read access, you need to start building a more complex level. I think there's a few limitations on how many levels are recommended. I think there are 8 levels. So if you need to start doing, I'm in a position A, nobody is in position B, and you are in position C, that will give me read access to your records. I am already using 3 levels of the 8. I think there's 8 levels that I recommend. So I like the hierarchy security model, but again, it's something to know really well on what not to do, because again, it could impact on your performance.
Now, Fraser's asked an interesting question that takes me back years and years. In fact, it takes me back 10 years, because what Fraser asking here is the best practice to use sharing to avoid performance issues. So guys, those who've been working in this space for a long time, you'll know about this, right? About the PO table and performance issues. That's no longer there, right? So what's your opinion on that, Nico? Because that sharing issue that that Fraser's referring to about performance, that's no longer a real issue anymore when it comes to security modeling in Dataverse.
I think the more complex scenario on the sharing is that it's more difficult to keep track on what you have actually access and what people have access than if you have a security role business unit strategy. So if I start sharing records, then it's hard to see, okay, who have access to what. I wouldn't recommend to do all sharing, mostly because of that. That it doesn't give you much, I think, or it's a personal opinion, right? So much control on who has what shared. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm thinking in Spanish and talking in English. Sorry for that. But it's I don't think it will give you the entire visibility on having governance on who's accessing what.
Right. So I think Fraser. So yeah. So what Nico's explained there is basically there are some challenges when using sharing. So it's not always good to use sharing. Use sharing where you where you have problems. But in short, Fraser, there isn't a performance issue thing anymore when it comes to sharing and the tables, the sharing, the security tables in Dynamics that used to be there. Microsoft has changed that now, so you shouldn't be having any performance problems anymore by using sharing to avoid performance, for example. That's no longer a situation. Okay, next question. Kevin Harrington, in relation to modifying records of certain types, isn't the business unit assigned to a record based on the owner? Is it possible to assign a record to a business unit?
Yeah, it is possible.
Yeah. So essentially, Kevin, what Nico explained earlier is that very concept, is the fact that records are owned essentially, where you can, based on the ownership of a record, you can make, for example, the security works in respect to the business unit in which that record belongs, based on the user or the account that owns that given record. So that's essentially the underlying concept that's being explained here.
And here, Kukulan is adding the screenshot that this changing the owner, the business unit owner, it's in preview. So yeah.
Fantastic. So then Fabric is saying, okay, guys, we've actually come to the end of the hour now. Last question. Kevin is saying, sorry, Fabric is saying, I'm curious about the tip. Do not rely on company org chart or the company org chart to build your access model. Can you give a very global explanation for non-very technical users? We try to do this and it's a headache.
I think, Farah, that you can explain that better from your
Sure, yeah,
from your screens, right?
definitely, yeah. I'm more than happy to explain that. I know Nico understands what we're. But he's reading my mind right now, as Nico, you're reading my mind. So yeah, so in short, this is a very important question, Fabra, that you've asked here, because typically an organization, when they're building out their Dataverse security model, they will begin by looking at their organization structure and building up their business units. That's not the way to do it. So that's definitely not the way you want to build out your business unit structure in Dataverse. I think that's probably one of the most important concepts to take away from this, is that you should be building your business unit structure based on the isolation that's required for your data access. That's the fundamental rule there, because your business org structure may not represent that. So it doesn't. Sometimes you might get lucky and it will translate into that. But in most cases, especially for large implementations, no, that's not the case. And I'm more than happy to go through that in deeper on the next session after this, when we go into deeper with the security model. So guys, we're at the end of the session. There's lots of great topics here. So thank you, questions. Thank you once again, Nico, for kicking off the event today. And I'm sure I'd look forward to seeing you in person very soon.
Yeah, me too.